Max, welcome to the show.
All right. Great to be here finally. Great to see you. And let's get it on.
Right, yeah. I mean, you have been one of the longest time people talking about Bitcoin, especially on the platform that you have with the various shows and material that you've been putting out there. And you also have quite publicly made the move to El Salvador, which is great. And I obviously want to get into some of that. Maybe you want to just start and tell us a little bit about your decision to go and set up in El Salvador.
Right. Well, when President Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender, as you point out, we've been into Bitcoin since 2011. We first started recommending it when it was $1. And so we've been tracking this industry now quite closely for a long time. And it was always some speculation about which country would be the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender, and El Salvador was that country. And so I felt it was incumbent upon me and Stacy to go there, to move there, to be a part of this revolution, to be in a country where Bitcoin is legal tender. That this is the frontier at the moment, and we like to be always at the bleeding edge of Bitcoin.
That's fantastic. And so, from your experience just going around the country, obviously San Salvador is the capital, probably the more well-developed area, and then El Zonte is where is really the Bitcoin capital, as it were. So, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there, just around town and around the country, how you're finding the Bitcoin adoption?
Right. As you point out, El Zonte or Bitcoin Beach is ground zero for Bitcoin adoption and hyper-Bitcoinization. So people are being paid in Bitcoin, they're using Bitcoin, they're saving in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is becoming a unit of account. It's becoming really the form of money for that town and nearby towns. San Salvador, the capital, a lot of Bitcoin going on as well around the country. If you look at a heat map, Bitcoin wallets, you see high concentration in El Zonte, you see concentration in San Salvador, and then you start to see it around the country popping up every single day. So awareness of Bitcoin is extremely high. It's on the front page of the newspaper often. It's being talked about by the president often. We talk about it on our media outlets a lot. And so awareness is there. Adoption is definitely in towns like El Zonte almost ubiquitous. And so it's spreading out to other areas of the country from there. So to kind of really follow up on what's happening, we've decided to launch a new VC fund, Zonte Capital. So this is my third Bitcoin-related VC fund. Simon Dixon and I started Bitcoin Capital, a VC fund, back in 2013, which was really the first dedicated venture capital fund at the time. And we started that in 2013 with an investment in BitPay, which was at that time the very first company really to be launched in the Bitcoin space. And then I also started Heisenberg Capital, which has been making Bitcoin investments as well, like in Casa and Swan Bitcoin. But El Zonte Capital will be really focused on Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization, as we see it in El Salvador, as well as Bitcoin maximalism. So I think Bitcoin maximalism is coming into its own now. People are understanding more about what that means. And I think I'm pushing for El Zonte and El Salvador to get more formal recognition of Bitcoin maximalism.
That's awesome, man. So, from a maximalism point of view, I definitely want to ask you your views there. I think there are perhaps different views in the community out there, right? So, some people have this idea of, okay, it's monetary maximalism. It's Bitcoin is going to be the money of the world. And then there's maybe platform maximalism, that people should be trying to build on top of Bitcoin as a platform. What's your view on maximalism? What does it mean to you?
Well, Bitcoin has demonstrated that it's the only truly decentralized monetary network in the world. So everything else, whether it's fiat money, CBDCs, gold, or altcoins, are all either absolutely or relatively centralized as compared to Bitcoin. And decentralization is the unique quality that makes Bitcoin revolutionary because it exists outside of any central control. It exists outside of any state control, of any group or corporate control, and therefore it exists in as pure money. It's virtually perfect money, where the transaction value of Bitcoin is determined entirely by by the market, so to speak. So this is unique. This doesn't exist anywhere else, and it's as such, it's pulling away from the rest of any competitor or any system that suggests that it might compete with Bitcoin. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of losers. Stephan, you've got the fiat money world is in total chaos. The dollar and the euro are really suffering epic, epoch-defining collapses at the moment. I'm sure I'm not telling any secrets here. It's pretty obvious what's going on in the fiat money world. In gold, as you see, there's no real price discovery in gold. It's manipulated. It's centralized to a large degree in vast storehouses of central banks and other players. Gold is not decentralized, really, when you compare it to Bitcoin. And in the altcoin market, it's clearly not decentralized. You've got plenty of attack vectors in the altcoin market. The centralization takes many forms. Either the code base has changed often, or you've got, it's driven by a cult of personality. It's just many forms of centralization you see in the altcoin space. None are truly decentralized. And just as an interesting side point, I saw a headline just cross the last couple of days that the EU has come out and said we need to attack Bitcoin and support Ethereum. I mean, Ethereum is kind of the second most well-known in this space, and it's clearly not decentralized. It's clearly not money. It's clearly an exit scam, and it's clearly the pet of the central bankers around the world. And it should be clear at this point, as Michael Saylor said in a Real Vision interview last year, altcoins, including Ethereum, you'd have to say that they're both unethical and immoral to support these projects. It goes beyond just failed projects. It's actually immoral to support them. And I think people need to realize that when they support these altcoins, including Ethereum, they're really acting in an unethical, immoral way.
Right. And I'm with you on this idea that there is a moral question around these things. And from a Bitcoin point of view, we see it as we're actually going to make the world a better place. And I think that's an important point. So from your point of view, on the positive side for Bitcoin, what kind of sociological changes do you see coming in a hyper-Bitcoinized world?
Well, there's a few to talk about. Some of them are in a very practical way, and some of them are more in a philosophical way. Let me talk about something kind of more philosophical to kick this off. So, because one of the attributes of Bitcoin is that it's unconfiscatable, that means that for somebody to build up a Bitcoin position, they can't rely on the old tried and true method of coercion or violence, right? Typically, the way empires are built or the way wealth is created is through violence and war. Countries or corporations. One of the side issues being discussed, of course, with El Salvador is that it's been the victim of American violence and CIA violence for decades because they are stealing the resources of that country and all over Central America. But this is not unique to El Salvador or Central America. The U.S. is doing this all over the world. And so violence and war are part and parcel with fiat money. So fiat money is something you can print really without constraint to fund your violence and your war. And with Bitcoin, because it's unconfiscatable, to accumulate more Bitcoin, you have to come to the market with something other than violence and coercion. You have to have something that people want to trade with you for Bitcoin. So it's inherently anti-war and anti-violence because of its nature of being unconfiscatable. It's the only unconfiscatable wealth we've ever had as humans. When the book came out, Bitcoin in Black America by Isaiah Jackson, he points out in the first chapter that he heard about Bitcoin on my show, Keiser Report, back in the early 2012 period, and immediately recognized that this is a great benefit to the Black community in America, because the Black community in America has, over years, almost by definition, they've had their wealth confiscated. This is one of the problems in the Black community, and he saw this as unconfiscatable wealth. And that's why adoption in America by the Black community is extraordinarily high. I think it's the highest group in America is Black American adoption of Bitcoin, for one of the simple reasons that it's unconfiscatable wealth. So that's something new for Black America. They actually can accumulate wealth now without having it stolen from them. But that's true all over the world. So philosophically, Bitcoin promotes war. It promotes peace. It promotes altruism in a lot of ways. And so philosophically, it changes the world. When people talk about Bitcoin using a lot of energy, the answer to that is, compared to what? The fiat money world, because it supports war, because it supports the prison industrial complex, because it supports hatred, and it supports fraud and corruption and media corruption. Obviously, the carbon footprint of fiat money is almost infinitely higher than Bitcoin. It's an absurdly high amount of carbon emissions associated with fiat money. By eliminating fiat money, carbon emissions would drop enormously, 70, 80%, and almost immediately, because you're getting rid of the worst carbon offenders in the world: the Pentagon, the war machine, the fraud, the corruption, the waste. So philosophically, those are some of the high-level, top-line changes that Bitcoin can bring about once a global Bitcoin standard comes in, Hyperbitcoinization comes in. And I think we see it in El Salvador. I always say that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And after less than a year after making Bitcoin legal tender, the government, when threatened with another violent attack by gangs, their response was, you know what? As we're imbued with the ethos of Bitcoin, and we are intolerant of this violence. So the president's gone on a campaign now to rid the country of this gang violence, which, by the way, is exported to El Salvador from the United States. So so they're cleaning up America's trash effectively, and they're doing so very effectively, because Bitcoin changes the way you think. You become intolerant of violence. You become intolerant of war, because you want to live a Bitcoin life. And this playing out right now in El Salvador. If other countries, and when other countries adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, they will also follow what El Salvador is doing and become intolerant of violence and intolerant of war. That's why it would be great if America became a Bitcoin standard, because they would stop their wars of convenience in various countries and focus on being better global citizens at home.
And what's required for more people to go on this journey of orange pilling, taking the orange pill? Is it an education piece? Is it just time? Is it technology? Is it the right kinds of investments? What do you think is going to be important for that?
Well, there's two factors that drive adoption. One is continued collapse of the banking world, and the way the inflating all the fiat money is driving a need for Bitcoin. So in countries where you see a lot of inflation, a lot of money printing, like Central America and South America, Bitcoin is already making huge inroads. And then in countries where banks are precarious or central banks are failing, like in Lebanon or a couple of others, the Bitcoin awareness and adoption is moving forward. So just the collapse of the status quo is driving adoption into Bitcoin. And then the other factor that drives adoption is really the way that Bitcoin almost is a way to hack its way into human nature by tickling the greed gene. When your neighbor starts getting wealthy with Bitcoin, you want to find out more about Bitcoin. And the price, the number go up technology that's built into the protocol means a lot of people become envious of their neighbors and friends and family be getting rich on Bitcoin, and they start to check out Bitcoin. So the FOMO aspect to it, clearly you see that in corporate America with Michael Saylor jumping in, and now you've got other corporations looking at his balance sheet and seeing what's happening over there and saying, hey, this is something we got to get into. We can't let this guy get super rich and we want to jump in too. So it's FOMO plus bank failure equal Bitcoin adoption. How soon does that take place? It's because it's a technology, it's a messaging technology, and it's going through what you could call exponential growth. We are shortly going to be at that moment when you'll see what we saw in the internet days back in 1997, where it went from 150 million users and people in the New York Times were writing about maybe the internet's a fad and it'll disappear, to suddenly becoming ubiquitous. So I think similarly with Bitcoin, you've got roughly 150, 100, 200 million users. We're entering a phase now where you'll suddenly see 1 to 2 billion users will be talked about as the current market for Bitcoin, and driven again by those two major pillars of adoption: bank and fiat failure plus FOMO.
And on that rapid adoption, does it concern you that it will often start as a custodial adoption? That there are many services who will start as a custodian, or do you believe that there's a viable pathway for people to graduate to this full self-sovereign, or at least more self-sovereign version of using Bitcoin?
I think that's where the community comes in, because the Bitcoin maximalist community is a hardcore community, and they're constantly pushing self sovereignty. And as people go on their Bitcoin journey and they realize the difference between uh, this option that you can have for self custody, they will gravitate toward it. So it's I think that's just I think that's where the community is crucial, in that it defines more precisely what the Bitcoin life is. People who live the Bitcoin life. So when we're in El Salvador, we try to live the Bitcoin life. What does this mean? That means self sovereignty. That means living in a big country with Bitcoin as legal tender. It means altruism. It means not more loving and caring, less violence and hatred. So that's where the community comes in. The community is great at defining what that means, and so I think that's just part of the journey that people take. Ultimately, they end up in a place of self sovereignty.
Fantastic. And so, in terms of when you talk to people on the ground in El Salvador, what's the education there like? As I understand, maybe in the earlier days, people might have thought of it like Chivo, which is the government wallet, and Bitcoin, they might have thought of them as the same thing. But obviously, over time, people are going to learn, people are going to get more accustomed to these things, and then it might grow from that. So, has that been your experience that you've seen?
Right. Going back to the 90s, Stefan, during when I had an internet company back in the 90s, people thought AOL was the internet. They thought, oh, that's the internet, AOL. There's a lot of people who think Facebook is the internet. So at the moment, people are not completely aware of what is the underlying Bitcoin protocol and what are the things that sit on top of the protocol. But so I think, again, we're at that moment of transition where people suddenly realize, hey, you know what? There's this underlying technology, et cetera, and it does a lot of different things. So again, using the 90s as a proxy for where we are now, I think that's kind of the transition we're making. People who would their first experience would be through Chivo Wallet would make that confusing point, but similarly, what they did in the 90s, and then we transitioned to a greater awareness and a deeper understanding, as we saw with the internet. So with El Zonte Capital, which is our VC fund, and if anyone has any questions about it, they can do an email to hello at El Zonte Capital, and you'll take it from there. But if you have any questions about it, so the fund is going to be focused on hyperbitcoinization. It's going to be focused on new entrepreneurs in El Salvador. Stacy's working with Jimmy Song, and they've identified dozens and dozens of potential new Bitcoin developers and programmers that they're going to be training up with the Jimmy Song's boot camp, Python Bitcoin developing boot camp. We've got now 50, 60 people in the first week we're able to pass the basic Python test and look eligible to be ready to go. So that's another exciting part of the country that was really an undiscovered source of talent. I don't think anyone realized that there was so much engineering talent in El Salvador, and yet that's what we're finding is that there's a lot of youth there that is completely technologically literate and ready to embrace this technology, and that's a lot of really good jobs and changing the country fundamentally. So that's right. So we'll be fostering that as much as we can at El Zonte Capital. And so again, the theme is hyper-Bitcoinization and Bitcoin maximalization. And but it won't be exclusively El Salvador. So we will be looking at the region and really around the world as well, where you see people mimicking El Salvador. So El Zonte is the template that other countries and other cities will be mimicking, right? So they are the leader, and it's the El Zonte formula, if you will. You know, how your country or your town can leave the fiat money warmongers behind and jump into the future with a peaceful, loving Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization.
Yeah, I like that. And it reminds me also how with some countries, they literally leapfrogged landline phones and just went straight to smartphone or straight to mobile in a similar way, where for some people, they may literally just jump straight into using Bitcoin and Lightning applications and wallets and everything without even really going to the fiat system.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen it all over Africa, where with the cell phone, mobile phones adoption, people just leapfrog ahead, away from the copper wires and telephony that the legacy systems were used to, and that brought on a lot of entrepreneurialism. And what was missing was Bitcoin. So, I mean, Africa is really a place that is benefiting incredibly by Bitcoin, by having this pristine, almost virtually perfect money that can cross all over the continent. Because just doing business in Africa from one country to another that could be 10 miles away or a mile away, it required an enormous amount of regulatory hoops to go through on the banking system, and all that's being obviated by Bitcoin. And to your point, absolutely, we have a leapfrogging going on. That's why agile, entrepreneurial countries like El Salvador, other countries all over Africa, now in Central America, are better positioned to capitalize on Bitcoin than, let's say, the United States or Great Britain, that are really completely entrenched in the old model, and they're not agile. I would not say when it comes to Bitcoin, they see it as a threat. The IMF and the World Bank and the Federal Reserve Bank and politicians, for the most part in the U.S., see Bitcoin as a threat, and it is a threat to the old way of doing business. There are fortunately some politicians in the U.S. like Cynthia Lummis and others who are now embracing Bitcoin. Ted Cruz is another. They see it as a vote winner, a vote getter. And people are becoming single issue voters where they'll vote for the Bitcoin candidate. So that's the in the U.S. Unlike other countries, you have states' rights, and the states are very, very powerful. They've been very powerful in, for example, changes to marijuana laws in the United States. It all started on the state level. Now it's going to the federal level. It probably will happen in the Bitcoin arena as well. There'll be a couple of states that will start to lead the Bitcoin charge. Could be Texas, could be Wyoming, and then that'll trickle up to the federal level as well. So the states in America, there's a tremendous balance of power that goes on there that's unlike anything in Europe. Europe tends to be very authoritarian in the way that it operates, and really around the world you find that. Only in the States do you have this kind of dynamism.
Yeah. And that also brings up this whole question of, in the community, there are sometimes debates about how much engagement there should be with the political process versus those who are just saying, no, we just build our Bitcoin thing and we don't worry about them. Do you have any thoughts on that? Where do you come down on that kind of balance? Do you believe that there's a role for the lobbying aspect of it, or do you see it more like, no, let's just build Bitcoin things?
The people come to Bitcoin who they are. You come to it at who you are. And if you're a technologist like Michael Saylor, that's how you come to the party. If you're a professor of monetary history like Sabdin Amus, that's how you come to the party. And you write the Bitcoin Standard, and it's an instant classic. If you're a politician, you're going to come to Bitcoin as a politician. You're not going to come to it in any other way. That's all you know. And as long as you are talking about Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin, that's all we need. That's all we care about. I've often said that the politicians in Washington that are now talking about Bitcoin is something of a fifth column for the Bitcoin revolution. They're inside, they're behind the walls, they're talking to other politicians. It's not needed, it's not required, but it doesn't hurt. Just like having Wall Street get into Bitcoin doesn't hurt. If you have trading derivatives on Bitcoin, doesn't hurt in the way that it does in the gold market, for example. People make that comparison often, but there's some key differences. So it doesn't hurt. Anybody who's buying Bitcoin, asking about Bitcoin, talking about Bitcoin is adding to the momentum of Bitcoin, moving it forward toward a global Bitcoin standard, hyper-Bitcoinization, and Bitcoin maximalism. Bitcoin maximalism, again, is something that if your journey on Bitcoin ultimately leads toward Bitcoin maximalism, the more you learn, the more you know about it, the more you enter into the what's called a Bitcoin maximalist or a toxic Bitcoin maximalist. So, and that's the road. The road narrows. The further down the road you get, the narrower the road is. It's a bit of a biblical reference, but there you have it. So, but because Bitcoin represents as, gosh, Stephan, there was I think it was either the Time magazine or the Economist. They ran a cover story 7 years ago now, and about Bitcoin, and they call it the truth machine. And that was very prescient, and that was very forward thinking. And it's very true. The absolute truth is going to create absolute outcomes. And in the case of perfect money, it means less war, less hate, and all these other benefits, and less carbon emissions.
So, in terms of what is building into the ecosystem, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what kind of companies you want to see or believe are going to be created over the next few years. Are they exchanges? Are they wallets? Are they education? What kinds of services and companies are you looking forward to seeing?
Well, on the Zonte Capital, which is this new venture capital fund, this myself, Stacy Herbert, and Corey Clipston are the general partners. And one of the areas that I've kind of flagged is education or ed tech. And I think this is ripe for disruption. I think also gaming, because I come out of gaming. I created the Hollywood Stock Exchange back in the 90s, which was a very successful online multi-user game, a simulated stock market based on Hollywood and movies and stars. And had to invent a digital currency for that, which I have a patent on. So that's how I got into Bitcoin, is that I invented a virtual currency back in 1996. So I was very familiar with virtual currencies. But you can tell how virtual currencies in a gaming environment the amount of educational the education really increases quite rapidly. So I'm interested also in gaming, in Bitcoin gaming, which is really not terribly explored. Des Dickerson has a gaming company that's looking at Bitcoin gaming, and I think that's the only real example I see of it. But I think that's a great way to increase adoption, increase education, increase the community. It plays into the FOMO that is an underlying part of the stack of Bitcoin. The gamification of it fits perfectly with the other elements to it. The game theory. I mean, we talk about game theory about Bitcoin, how it's built into the protocol, but we have very little gaming in Bitcoin, which is kind of surprising. So I think these two really to come together in a way. I'd love to see that. If I find some Central American developers who can create some Bitcoin gaming apps, and I would be extremely interested in that. So that would be a focus.
Yeah. So companies like Zebedee and Thunder Games are well known in the Bitcoin world for that. And I think it's interesting as well because some of the games that first came in the Bitcoin world were sort of Bitcoin centric. But I think maybe what's needed to take it to that next level is some games that are enjoyable and fun in and of their own right, and also have some Bitcoin component with them. And I think perhaps that's the focus as well. And also trying to get plugged into already existing games is perhaps one angle to be explored there on the Bitcoin gaming idea.
Right. Well, one of the very, very first applications really was Satoshi Dice. Eric Voorhees, when he was a Bitcoin maximalist back, 10 years ago or so. Satoshi Dice was like the first introduction a lot of people had. That predates even the Silk Road, I believe. So, and it drove a lot of adoption. People heard about it. So yeah, Thunder Games is active, and I think that is a direction that can be further developed in a big way. And as you point out, the gaming is a lot of different ways that Bitcoin can be used in gaming. I know that Samson Moe with Infinite Fleet has an online game essentially that is built on Liquid, that has it's Bitcoin, and it's um, using kind of the online multiplayer fantasy world gaming environment. I think that'll attract a lot of adoption and as well. And these types of things are I don't know. I think that there's a huge untapped market here, to be honest. So at El Zonte Capital, again, I'm totally interested, in the people that can come up with interesting games like this. I'm definitely interested. Any startups out there, Central America, Latin America, around the world. This is for me as one of the general partners. I'm one of three, so this is not my sole decision, but I would definitely be looking at that.
For sure. And I think the other interesting area that you mentioned around game theory, talking about adoption at a country by country level, I'm curious to get your thoughts on who might be next. And we are seeing, as we speak today, it's the 27th of April, 2022, and we are seeing some news about Central African Republic. Now, they are a small nation in Africa, just under 5 million. And so we seem to be seeing some news that they have adopted Bitcoin. And so I'm curious, Max, if you have any reactions on this and thoughts about where it's all going in terms of which countries.
Right. Well, I was talking on my show back in 2014 about who would be the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender, and some names were tossed around. What might be the first to do it, based on they were being sanctioned, and countries had a real need to get out of the dollar, and nobody was picked El Salvador at that time, although it was discussed that it would be a small country, a country that was nimble, that could make changes pretty rapidly. And so that would be, I think, still hold. I mean, these are smaller countries now that they want to become bigger countries. And so they understand that by making Bitcoin legal tender, they're immediately plugged into the global monetary network of perfect money. So it's a way for them to do a leap and bound, to jump ahead. So that's where we're going to see a lot of action. On the big countryside, the bigger countries, I guess you'd have to look at Mexico now. I mean, Mexico seems like they keep talking about Bitcoin. They've got some politicians that are very pro Bitcoin. I know we set up a meeting between Ricardo Salinas Pliego and President Bukele, a meeting that was set up by Stacy a few weeks ago in El Salvador. And there was a lot of conversation about how these two countries are now, on the aligned up with Bitcoin, and increasingly, it looks like the benefits that would accrue to Mexico by making Bitcoin legal tender are starting to really become clear to the current leadership and the future leadership. So that would be a spot definitely to look at. But I think it's one thing is clear, is that it's inevitable, right? We all say Bitcoin is inevitable. I think that the various countries making it legal tender is just going to keep rolling through until we get a global Bitcoin standard. The countries that'll be last to adopt it will be those who are more sensitive to the disruptive properties of Bitcoin. So the U.S. as a whole, Europe seems really frightened of Bitcoin, which makes sense. The UK is really frightened of Bitcoin. That makes sense because they are very top heavy bureaucratic countries that are very, very slow to change, and they're ossified to a great deal. And so they're going to be late to the party, to their detriment, to their, they're going to end up buying at a much higher price. You get the price you deserve, right?
That's right. And I think the other example country that gets thrown around, not necessarily from a Bitcoin legal tender, but just from an overall arc as a country, is Singapore, right? So I think that's something that even President Bukele has mentioned, this idea of, maybe not explicitly, or I'm not sure, maybe he has explicitly mentioned this idea of El Salvador being sort of like a Singapore of Central or South America.
Right. Well, again, the FOMO is going to kick in. So El Salvador, they reported the biggest GDP growth in their, well, definitely in 30 years, but maybe in history, 10%, 10, over 10%. This year looks like they're going to do even better because tourism is exploding. The elimination of the terrorists, the gang terrorists, means essentially everyone gets a 25% tax break because of the extortion will go away. Plus the Bitcoiners, plus El Zonte Capital and others are kind of developing and the infrastructure for technology and technology development. And so their GDP is set to do a lot more than 10% in this fiscal year. So other countries are going to look at that and say, what are they doing right? How does El Salvador GDP, the fastest growing economy in the world? And they'll say, well, it must be this Bitcoin thing. So the FOMO kicks in. The Bitcoin is supercharging that country, and the numbers are clear in the GDP numbers and the revenue numbers, the tourism numbers, and the president is totally orange pilled, and it's like having Satoshi run a country. You know, Clearly the impact is going to be hyper Bitcoinization and supersonic growth.
And I think it's really cool just that it has become almost like a pilgrimage for Bitcoiners, that especially those who are in parts of the world close to El Salvador. A lot of Americans and Canadians have been flying down as like almost like a little Bitcoin pilgrimage to go see El Zonte, and whether that's for the conferences that were on. There were some last year, Adopting Bitcoin and La BitConf on in November 2021. So that was when I visited as well. I thought it was just really fun to be able to walk around, and you could just go to different shops and pay with Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, and you could just see it go through straight away. I thought that part was so cool. And there's also been some speculation that, let's say, a large multinational who sets up for Bitcoin payments in El Salvador, well, they may then leverage that infrastructure in some other country. So we may see it even at a multinational corporation level where they decide, hey, you know what? It's not going to be that much more work for us to just turn on Bitcoin in this other country. Let's just do it.
Yeah, exactly. People in El Salvador are paying using Bitcoin at McDonald's, right? So they might just turn it on in other countries. So that's and other big corporations that are in El Salvador. And the events that we have, you came to one of our events in El Salvador, and when we have them, we've had 3 of them so far, and we 250 people show up from all over the world. People fly in for these events. They want to meet Max and Stacy and the guests like yourself, who we bring in, high level, well known Bitcoiners. And so it's like a mini conference almost, and people fly in from all over the world. They'll have another one coming up, I believe. Stacy would know more of the details, but I believe there's one coming up in July, so that people can mark their calendars. There's going to be a big Bitcoin meetup in El Salvador, in El Zonte, I believe, in July. So that would be big. The Bitcoin week in El Salvador will be coming up in November. Last year, the first year they did it, it brought in um, more than $100 million in tourism money. You know, tourism year to year, the comparison went from 700 million to 1.4 billion from the year before. So tourism is absolutely exploding, and that's going to be up again this year. And it's a fantastic country to visit. I mean, they got the volcanoes, the ocean is gorgeous, the surfing is fantastic, and the Pacific is warm. It's a warm water, unlike, let's say, Santa Monica in California. You know, the water there is quite cold. People actually don't go swimming in Los Angeles because the water is too cold. But in El Salvador, the water is warm. The beaches are beautiful, and the people are really happy. You know, they've got this incredible president at the helm. All these changes are being made. Bitcoin, it means they've got unconfiscatable wealth. People will come up to me and they'll say, Max, look. And they'll hold up and they'll say, I've got $50. And this is like they're thrilled that they've got savings. That, you know, guys who are selling, let's say, donuts on the street. He started using Bitcoin, and it made the business instantly more efficient and more profitable. He's hired now somebody to work with him and to expand his business. So businesses are, all these entrepreneurial mom and pop businesses are expanding with Bitcoin and the infrastructure of payments that come with Bitcoin, and that message is going out all over the region to Guatemala and other countries. People are waking up to this, that, you know, we have the ability now to become individually sovereign, to kind of write our own future, to hope, to have a faith, to have some optimism here, and that is infectious. You know, people are naturally want to have a happy heart. You know, and the Bitcoin allows that to happen, and so it spreads. It spreads easily, and this is what we're seeing. So the people like going there just because they feel better. It's like getting a tonic. It's like drinking happy juice or something. And plus, speaking of happy juice, the coffee in El Salvador is amazing. I mean, this is incredible. The coffee, I've never, since coming back from El Salvador, all the coffee here in the United States, it feels like decaffeinated or something. It's putting me to sleep. I need to go back just for the coffee.
That's fantastic. And so, from a Bitcoiner perspective, have you got any tips then? Or maybe we could talk a little bit about what are some of the Bitcoin companies who are there right now. So as I understand, so obviously Galloy Money, they were behind Bitcoin Beach. I know Ebex Mercado are doing some of the payments infrastructure, and as an exchange, OpenNode are helping with some of the payments. I think Bitrefill are there also. So what can you tell us about Bitcoin companies in El Salvador at the moment?
Right. Well, you did mention kind of the top companies that are there now. We're working right now to bring Swan Bitcoin into El Salvador more aggressively. You know, they're launching their new app in a couple of weeks, and we shot a series of commercials with Max and Stacy for this new app that'll start running when the app is launched, and we shot them in El Salvador. So that'll be pretty cool. The Fold card, Will Reeves' company, is also looking now to expand into El Salvador. We work with them pretty closely, and they're looking to get big into El Salvador. The Zonte Capital, our new VC fund, we've committed to making an investment in a company called Bold, BOLD. So it's a card that is essentially, you use your card and it draws on your Bitcoin purely as collateral. So it's backed by Bitcoin, and you're using nothing. You're not spending your Bitcoin. You're just using it as collateral. So it draws on that as when you're, so you don't ever have to sell your Bitcoin. So that we're working with them to get more presence in El Salvador. So the Zonte Capital will hopefully, be that bridge for a lot of companies trying to make it into El Salvador and Central America. We can offer as part of what we do, a way to get into that market. And of course, we invest in a lot. We'll be investing in these companies, and so those that. Oh yeah, Samson Mao, of course, is launching Jan 3. So he left Blockstream, and he's setting up shop in El Salvador with a company called Jan 3, and that's exciting. So it's already. I think they're looking to raise a big chunk of cash, so that looks good. And so that's what's going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to see. I think it's really great. And do you have any tips then for people? Like, let's say there's a listener now, they're a Bitcoiner, they haven't been yet. Do you have any tips on what they should do and how they should go about visiting El Salvador?
Right. Well, it's easy to do. you know, uh, you can fly there from many places. You land at the San Salvador airport. It's about 40 minutes into town. There's a couple of hotels in San Salvador that are great, and the whole town. San Salvador is kind of like, there are parts of it. It's like West Hollywood. It's what it looks like. It's got low-rise buildings, palm trees. People are out. The music's playing. They're dancing. They're out eating, and it's a pretty happening place. And El Zonte is only a 50-minute ride from there. People are still frightened by the violence, which was a thing maybe before the current president took office. That would have been more of a factor, but currently, this is, I would say, not a factor. When you compare it to, let's say, Chicago or these other American cities, it's a freaking nunnery compared to some of these other American cities. So that's not really a factor. The people have gone there and visited. They have said, and that their sense is they have no feeling that they're in a violent environment whatsoever. So so that's something for folks to keep in mind. Bring your bathing suit, and if you're in El Zonte, there, it's divided by a bit of a little stream, the two parts. So to get back and forth, I recommend you bring a proper footwear. Is my top recommendation for coming to El Zonte. Like I was wearing these loafers for a week, and I destroyed them because I kept going through this water back and forth. But you need proper waterproof, like, sandals. That's pretty much the key to it. Once you have those, that you're good to go. Then it's just you, the surf, and a lot of really good coffee. Very zen-like atmosphere. You would probably just sit down there and take it all in, and you might have your consciousness raised in a way that will shock you. You'll meet yourself in El Zonte.
And it might be a place people want to think about if they can work remotely. They might think about, hey, go and work in El Zonte, and then you can spend Bitcoin. If you're earning Bitcoin and you can spend it directly, you might feel more connected in with the whole Bitcoin circular economy.
Yep, absolutely. You can do your digital nomads work there in El Zonte, and as you point out, you're plugged into Hyperbitcoinization, so you're at one with Satoshi. You've achieved Bitcoin nirvana.
I love it. That's fantastic. I think those are probably the key points I was interested to ask about. I guess maybe just one other area. Do you see more development coming around the whole residency by investment or potentially citizenship by investment? Do you see more details coming for that, for those Bitcoiners who are thinking about that aspect for El Salvador?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So this is part of a set of laws that are working their way through legislation right now. So in terms of the volcano bond, and which is a very interesting project, an exciting project, that will come as on the tail of passing this suite of laws, approximately 52 laws. So they're really rewriting the entire financial regulatory structure in El Salvador to be Bitcoin centered, Bitcoin focused. So that means not only for volcano bonds, but for a lot of companies that are more in looking to get into finance, El Salvador will be a good destination for that, because you can kind of recreate what we've seen in other financial centers, but do so like a Singapore, for example, or New York. You can do that in El Salvador, but on top of a stack of laws that are Bitcoin focused. So I think that's going to be enormously impactful to the economy and to the region. And so this is something to keep in mind, that the attraction of this location for that type of business is going to start to go up pretty sharply in the near future. Included in that suite of laws are going to be the citizenship and residency laws and regulations in terms of what people will be able to do to acquire, to obtain citizenship in El Salvador. And there will be there's talk about it right now. What would be, let's say, the sweet spot to attract lots of folks? There are other countries that have economic citizenship, particularly in the islands, like Dominica and St. Kitts and these other types of islands. They have different. Our friend Katie, the Russian, specializes in this type of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know for sure, but my speculation is that they're going to attempt to kind of be very attractive in that market with an attractive kind of price point, if you will. But we'll get more details as they come out. But it will be, the government is keenly interested in getting Bitcoiners to relocate to this Bitcoin citadel of El Salvador. So they're gonna be responsive to what Bitcoiners want, and they will be accommodative to
Yeah.
that.
One other area is obviously Bitcoin City. Do you have any intention of, are you going to go and get a place there as well?
Well, definitely interested in creating a company there, because there's no taxes. There's no payroll tax, capital gains tax, income tax, so it's no tax free. They will have a value added tax. That will be the only tax in Bitcoin City, and so that as a location to start a company, I think that will be, it's kind of like an enterprise zone. So that will attract a lot of folks for sure, and that's in a whole nother area that's being developed. Property prices, are definitely going up in places like the Bitcoin City area, as well as in San Salvador and El Zonte. Prices are going up. Having said that, guys like Mike Peterson, who is really creating the Bitcoin beach phenomenon, is working really hard with the government and other folks to keep development manageable, so that it doesn't get out of hand, it's not overdeveloped, and there's plenty of housing for local folks. And again, because everyone's thinking like a Bitcoiners, the objective tends to go toward something that's more harmonious and peaceful. In the fiat money world, people tend to do things that are inconsistent with the benefits of the community as a whole, because it's Bitcoin breeds a lot of corruption, because the laws are generally made by the folks who have the most fiat money, or proof of stake, is just another version of fiat money, isn't it? So it breeds corruption. But with Bitcoin, you have a completely different mindset. And I think we'll see that reflected in how the country develops. So we're not going to see in the tourist areas what we see in other tourist areas, where it becomes overdeveloped in ways. And I don't think we're going to see that. We'll see some development for sure, but I think we're going to see something a little bit more holistic and reflect the values and ethos of Bitcoin maximalism.
Fantastic, Max. Well, really enjoyed chatting with you. And for any listeners who want to find you online or find El Zonte Capital, where's the best place?
Well, if you're curious about El Zonte Capital, you can send an email to hello@elzontecapital.com. And you can that's the best way to kind of start your journey into El Zonte Capital. Plus, we have a Twitter feed, El Zonte Capital on Twitter. I'm on Twitter, of course. Stacy Herbert's on Twitter. So those 3 Twitter feeds would definitely cover pretty much everything we're up to at the moment. Information about this event coming up in El Salvador in July. Bitcoin Week in November is coming up. We're going to be there next week in El Salvador. I'm working on presenting a paper, essentially outlining what I believe to be the tenets of Bitcoin maximalism, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that more next week. And so that's going to be interesting. That's something to look forward to next week.
Fantastic. Well, Max, I enjoyed chatting with you and look forward to catching up soon. Thanks for joining me.
All righty. Thanks.